Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. Welcome to episode number 290 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. I cannot believe that we are 10 episodes away from number 300. Got to figure out a fun way to celebrate that. If you have any ideas, find me on the Instagrams, send me a DM, let me know what you think would be a good time. But as for today's episode, today we have Janelle Hardy with us. What's cool about Janelle is that I had actually not been familiar with her work until she interviewed me on her podcast. And it was such an enjoyable conversation. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes that I was like, oh my God, I want this woman on our show. I want more of her energy. I want to know more about what she does. So this is a really, really enjoyable interview. We talk about the importance of self-reclamation and self-expression, and also how, as a mother, because Janelle has a daughter, how watching your children watching your children grow up brings up your own issues as they progress through their own timeline in a really interesting way. We talk about the process of getting to know yourself, shedding layers to find your wholeness, also about bodywork. Janelle is a bodyworker, and I was really curious about some of the energetics of that when you have your hands on so many people's bodies all the time, how that actually affects you and your life and in your everyday. We talked about cultural experiences, socialization, and also the relationship between grief and rage, not just in your life in general, but how it relates to your ancestry. So head on over to the show notes if you want any of the links. We referenced a lot of resources in this episode. The show notes will be at untameyourself.com/290. And that's it. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Truth Telling. Today we have Janelle Hardy with us, and I'm excited for this, even though this interview wasn't airing until like 2 or 3 months after we recorded it. But at the time I'm recording it, I just got to be interviewed by Janelle last week, and it was such a good and deep and nourishing conversation. So I'm excited to be here with her on our show. So Janelle, welcome.
Hi.
Our first question that I always ask is, what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
okay, there's always so many truths, but I think the truest, deepest truth for me that spans years now is the importance of self-reclamation, of not only for myself, but for everyone. But especially for myself, since I'm the only one who can affect the change for myself, is learning how to simply be. Easier said than done, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just such a simple sentence that we can talk about the entire rest of the time. So I was cruising around on your website before earlier this afternoon, and a lot of your language, I loved your about page. So by the way, everyone
thanks.
listening, we'll put it in the show notes to go to your website, but specifically the about page, you wrote so beautifully, and a lot of your work is around your reclamation centers a lot around self-expression. So I was not shocked that your writing was very beautiful, but a lot of your language is very similar to what I do at Wild Soul Movement. And I always love to see that because I don't think there could possibly be enough people, but especially women, doing the work of reclaiming ourselves in whatever way that looks. So what's kind of the origin story? What got you into that?
Just being really uncomfortable in myself. And let's see, I need to pause a moment. Origin story. I had a lot of experiences growing up of feeling like an outsider. And feeling like an outsider despite in many ways appearing to be right. You know, being pretty, being tall, being smart, having all the things going for me and still ending up being excluded and not having friends in junior high school. So, and you know, it's like that. Can I swear on this podcast?
I prefer not F-bombs, but if you really need to, go for it.
Okay. So just imagine the cursing. It's really tough. It's really tough, especially when you're young and your self-awareness is often highly developed, but also internalized. So it's very tough to go to, in my case, a small Catholic school and be the one that's not cool, the one no one else wants to be seen with, because then they'll also be not cool. And so having no friends, being friendless is tough. But what it cultivated in me was a lot of observant qualities, you know, because if you're not in it, hanging out and playing and having a ton of fun, mostly what's happening is you're watching and wondering, well, why am I on the outside? And the thing that I've had to unravel a lot of in terms of self-reclamation was, what's wrong with me? That's what I internalized.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me and how can I fix it are the two worst, this is where I'd be cursing again, just most truly awful beliefs we can have about ourselves. And, but the blessing and the curse, right, is actually starting the inquiry of, oh, wait a second. I've traveled down the road of what's wrong with me. Actually, there's nothing wrong with me. What's wrong with our culture? What's wrong with a school system that allows this kind of hidden emotional bullying? And scapegoating? What's wrong with social structures that allow certain people to be considered less than or set aside? You know?
Yeah. So interesting, because growing up, I actually experienced both. I played sports, and I think by nature of playing a sport, you're automatically included. And I was naturally very athletic. So, and especially in terms of like girls don't get picked for the team, I would be like the first or second girl. I'd be like the one you wanted on your team. So that gave me an automatic inclusion and an automatic in some ways, right? But then there were like weird social situations where I wasn't. Like I lived on this block where all the kids were friends, and there were these three brothers, and I was the only person that was never invited in their house. So weird. I lived there for 3 years, and I think I only ever saw the inside of their house once. Meanwhile, other people were like in their house all the time. And so bizarre to have both. And I'm so curious about, you know, as you say your experience, I'm envisioning kids who were on the out, and also just being a kid unaware of the things you say and do and what kind of pain and experience other people. It just sucks. There's so much we don't know. And I love that you brought up instead of the what's wrong with me, it's the what's wrong with our culture. Because I can think back on some things I did and said, especially in middle school. I wasn't a bully, but I was not the kindest kid either. And so how did that happen? And like, where did I pick that? Like, what the hell made me think it was okay to like tease people or make fun of people sometimes, you know? It's all incensing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have, your daughter's in high school now, right?
Yeah, she just turned 16, grade 11. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I've heard about motherhood or parenthood in general is that as your child hits these ages where you had experiences, does it drum your stuff back up?
Yes, it does. It does. Let me give that a little thought. So it's interesting because in some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't. For me, I have always been a quiet person, and for a while I was excruciatingly shy. A lot of times quiet and shy get conflated. Being an introvert gets conflated with quiet and shyness. They're different things. Extroverts can be shy as well.
Yes.
Shyness is more a fear of social judgment. And partly in this phase of feeling so rejected by my peers and friendless, I developed such a horrible shyness that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I would start to blush and then I would feel myself blushing and I'd be mortified. And so it was hard enough to get the words out or try to connect when I was fearing rejection all the time. And then the shyness started and I was done for. Having said that, my daughter is an incredibly social extrovert. So I'm a highly sensitive person and an empath and an introvert, someone who basically needs a lot of alone time. Raising a very social, alive, extroverted, dramatic child all by myself. And so I mean, that's a whole other thing, but it's intense raising children. And then if your personality coping styles are so very different, that's intense too. But back to your question of the things being stirred up. Yes. And what was interesting with watching my daughter go through, she experienced different kinds of social challenges. Mine were around exclusion, trying to get in, trying to fit in, trying to be included. Hers were being loved so much that she never got a moment to herself because people are drawn to her.
Wow.
Very intensely. She's very charismatic and also kind, loving person. So she is very tuned into not wanting to hurt someone's feelings, so I had to actually learn how to soften my boundaries, and she's had to learn how to develop healthy boundaries around creating some distance around herself. So my fears got stirred up for sure. And then I got to witness, so the popular kid, in quotation marks, they have their own set of challenges that I was unaware of until I started trying to guide my daughter through those challenges.
Did that bring you any deeper resolve in your own healing to have kind of a different perspective on what the kids who you were probably reaching for? I love, my mind goes in weird places. So if you're like, no, not at all, it's totally cool. But I'm wondering, did that give you any deeper healing for yourself around your old stuff to know that those kids, it's not like everything was so fun and amazing either?
Yeah, well, partly. I think being an adult looking at the dynamics in the school system gives me the perspective of my peers were also children and young people, and all of us needed better guidance.
Yes.
All of us needed mentors and people paying better attention and teaching us how to be in relationship and resolve conflict and include people and also have healthy boundaries. And none of that happened in my small Catholic high school. It really didn't.
Yeah.
So that's my perspective with that. I think that what I've learned from watching my daughter navigate life as a social extrovert, and I'm not shy anymore, by the way, but it was painful. It was a painful healing journey. Good, very essential, but it was painful to be shy. It was painful to unravel it. And the thing that I've learned now just in relating to adults and being in community and trying to connect and also take care of myself is how essential it is that not only that I know my gifts and my challenges, and I'm not going to say that I'm on top of that all the time, but this comes kind of back to the self-reclamation.
Yes.
The better I know myself and the more clear I am about what I need in order to be wholehearted in the world, meaning knowing that I love social events, especially if there's a dance party, but also knowing that I can get incredibly overwhelmed very quickly in social events. I have to make a decision. Can I wholeheartedly go and be social? If yes, great, off I go. But if no, then I have to stay home and be wholehearted about that. I can't stay home and be hating on myself for being overwhelmed. I can't stay home and stew in this feeling of missing out on the fun. I have to be wholeheartedly home, having a good time by myself, having my quality quiet time, or wholeheartedly out there and engaging with people, not hiding in the corner. You know what I mean? So from that perspective, back to like learning from my extroverted daughter, when I engage with other people, I've learned it's really useful to drop my stories about myself. Yes, I know I'm all these things, and then set that aside and kind of like go, woo, hi, here I am. Who do I get to connect with? Be really enthusiastic. And then when I start to hit my tipping point of, in my case, it's kind of, feels like claws on my unseen energy body. And I start to get a little grumpy and my nasty little thoughts start to spin in my head. That's when I take myself outside or I go to the bathroom, I go somewhere to be alone. And if I can't recover that, then again, back to the wholehearted, I was just like, I'm done. Time to go home, be happy about it, and not put any of my projections about being unliked or unwanted or other people not attending to my needs. Make sure not to put that onto the more social people that can stay longer and and not envy them, right?
Oh, you just said so many great things. So I love discernment. And so this piece about using wholeheartedness as the barometer for how you're going to engage and whether or not you're going to engage is amazing. And as you were talking, I was thinking, and I also from earlier appreciate the distinction between shyness and introversion, because I actually have a mom who's very extroverted, but she's also shy. And it really kind of depends on the circumstance. Like with people she knows, she'll talk up a storm all day long. You know, sometimes I have to be like, okay, fast forward through the details. Like, what's the outcome of the story, you know? Because she could literally talk all day. But with like new people or certain circumstances, it's not the case. Like she doesn't want to be there. And, but she's not an introvert. And I am also super outgoing. But I, like you just described, I have a limit. And when I reach my limit, also like you just, I got cranky. I was thinking of a story earlier this year. I was in New York City and I push myself a little bit when I'm somewhere and there's so many people to see and so many things to do. Like I will push myself a little bit beyond my limit because it's like an occasion or an event, you know?
Yeah.
But I had pushed myself too much. Like I had just done 3 back-to-back days of client immersions. I had met up with 2 friends. I was staying with another friend. And then there was also Questlove, the DJ from, he's on the Tonight Show now, but from The Roots, the drummer from the band The Roots, was spinning at the Brooklyn Bowl a Prince-only set because it was right around Prince's birthday. And I'm like, we have to go to this. So I was already like kind of running on fumes. And I was like, oh my God. And I hit my wall. And my friend and I were trying to take the subway home from Brooklyn back into Manhattan. And I looked at her and I was like, okay, I've hit the point where I'm cranky. So I can't, anything that comes out of my mouth for the rest of, like, I can't. I'm going to do my best. But like, I cannot. I'm about to lose my shit. So we're just going to go get an Uber. We're not going to wait for this subway because I'm there. I'm there. And something about what I had said hadn't registered for her. And like a month or two later, I get an email from her that was like, you were so rude to me. And I know you respect boundaries. So I need to have and I was like, girl, I'm so sorry. I thought I told you. I thought I told you we'd crossed over into the territory, into like the land I really try not to go into, but sometimes it happens. So I'm with you, and I really honor the part about knowing yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so big, and I love the part that you also said about not bringing any of your stories into it, right? Like when that happened, when I got that email from her, I didn't have a bit of shame. I was just like, I'm so sorry I didn't communicate that well enough. I really was in the danger zone. And then we had this, she's like, oh, thank you so much. I was nervous to say. So anyway, knowing yourself is so big. How, whether it's in your work with people or your own experience, I'd love to hear a little more of your experience, thoughts, perspective on that process of getting to know yourself. Because there's so many different ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's so many ways. They're all pretty valid. Mm-hmm. They all, I would say they suit us at different ages and stages.
Yes.
So I'm never going to say any approach is wrong, but I can describe what I've cobbled together for myself. For me, the most important, most effective ways that I've found to reclaim myself are through the body, through so with the body. I'm a body worker as well, so I've got 12 years of hands-on experience taking people through an unraveling process, and I went through that process as well, which is why I do what I do. And then I've always been an artist. And so when I don't do creative work, what I noticed, because I had a few years of intense, painful creative block, I feel kind of sick in my soul when I'm not doing something creative. So that's the other part of it is unblocking the flow of creative energy, which I don't define as just the things that professional artists do, but the flow of vibrancy, of erotic energy, of being alive, of having circulatory systems, of going through this incredible arc of conception, birth, puberty, growth, and then decline. If we're lucky, we get to become old and have that full arc. So the body, the creative force, and then the third kind of healing, self-reclamation process is actually going beyond the individual, beyond just me, and starting to investigate, who am I? Who do I come from? Who are the people that created me? Where do I come from? What languages do I come from? What lands do I come from? How on earth did I end up exactly where I am? I'm speaking from Canada, but Canada, like the United States and many other countries, is a product of brutal colonization. And also this, what I call the great forgetting. So it's so many, not only wiping out and intentional destruction of the indigenous peoples of the lands that were taken over, but also for the people that immigrated and immigrate, and the people that were brought over, the people that were enslaved, the people that left their homelands, what fascinates me is that it is very difficult for most people to recall more than their grandparents' names, if that,
Yep.
let alone where did they come from, what cultures did they come from, what languages did they come from. And so starting to turn around and face behind me. And I love the image of the beautiful image of me before I was conceived and fertilized. I was a little egg in my mother's ovaries when she was a little egg in her mother's womb, and so on and so forth. There's an actual visceral, physical, multi-generational connection through the mother line that we have. And isn't it magnificent to start to turn back around and go like, I want that, and I want to deepen into that. And so that is also healing work.
I only learned that thing about the egg. I don't remember if it was this year or at some point last year. And it just like blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. I was in my grandmother's womb.
Yeah.
It's so cool. But it also then explains, I saw this meme earlier in the year. I don't remember whose it was who to attribute the quote to, but it was something along the lines of trauma will continue through a family line until someone decides to heal it. And I'm like, well, I mean, if I was already around during those times, the things that was happening, crazy. So I love, it just explains how heavy and how intense some of my own stuff has been in this life, where there is not necessarily reason for it to be. Does that make sense?
Total sense. I have that experience too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the patterns I've noticed, which I'm going to speak to because I imagine you and your listeners will probably resonate, is feeling not quite right, feeling like, well, my life looks good. My parents did the best they could. Why do I feel flat? Or why do you think, why can't I feel as happy as I should feel, right? Questions like that are really good clues as to multi-generational trauma. There's a great body of work around adult children of alcoholics, but a little less literature around grandchildren of alcoholics, where their parents, this is my situation for sure, your parents weren't alcoholics, but your parents came from alcoholic families and were deeply impacted by the dysfunction and often accompanied by other kinds of abuse when there's alcoholism or addictions in a family system. And then what happens often is if the parents have the fortitude and ability to not become tangled up in those patterns themselves, they often don't want to share that they come from these families. So the transmission of coping patterns, belief systems is all nonverbal. And then the grandchildren grow up with a much better, materially better childhood than their parents, but they still are not allowed to feel certain feelings. They're not allowed to express themselves in certain ways that would have been dangerous for their parents when their parents were growing up, because we take that on. And then the question often becomes, what's wrong with me? Again, that terrible question, right? But it turns inwards when someone grows up thinking, I've got everything I should have to be happy. Why am I not happy or satisfied? What's wrong with me? When actually, and I was fortunate in my case, my parents spoke about the fact that they wanted to change this pattern. That their dads drank too much, that there were things they didn't want us exposed to. So I was fortunate to know that, and still there's that question of, holy moly, like what is this? It's almost like you can feel these multi-generational patterns, and it's also with the witch hunts from European ancestral lines, and and different, so many of us have so many different ancestral backgrounds, and even if it's hidden or unknown, there may be a thread of trauma traveling through, and it shows up. And then we get the opportunity, right? I feel like it's hard work shifting these patterns, but it's also such an opportunity to start bringing insight and awareness and compassion and going, wow, well, it stops here. And having a child of my own, I'm like, oh man, I'm sure I've passed on quite a few patterns I didn't want to, but I'm really trying to nip things in the bud and do my own healing work so that so she doesn't have to carry quite as much weight.
Yeah.
And then it ripples out peripherally. I start relating to my mom differently, and my siblings and my aunties, and then I'm just gonna take it bigger and go. You can heal backwards in time, right? So there you go.
Yeah.
It's hard work, but it's worthy.
It's super worthy. Quick break in the show, everyone, to introduce you to a new sponsor we have. The name of the company is Prove It. That's Pruvit. And they are a company that produces an extremely high quality, therapeutic grade ketone supplement. If you are familiar with the benefits of a ketogenic lifestyle, what the process of ketosis is in the body, or supplementing with ketones, you already know what it is. If you don't, you can find information by going to www.elizabethdialto.experienceketo.com. So that's elizabethdialto.experienceketo, which is KETO.com. Now, I want to give a couple of disclaimers here. I was introduced to this very synchronistically and serendipitously by a dear friend of mine who lives in the UK. She was visiting Los Angeles back in December. I didn't even know we were going to be having this conversation. And she just started telling me about this company that she was working with, this supplement that she was taking, and all the benefits for her in her own body with her own health. One of which was clearing up some brain fog. I have been dealing with some inflammation and some digestive issues and just some very minor health things, all related to inflammation over the course of the last few years, and really trying to treat myself naturally without taking any medications or having to do any major Western medicine protocols. And as well, going back and forth with my diet and food and how I want to eat, whether I want to be eating more meat products or less meat products and things like that. And so I got some samples of this, and I've just really enjoyed the energy, the impacts it's having on my body. It's definitely helping with the inflammation. The other disclaimer I want to give is if you go over to check that out, yes, I do get credit if you make any orders or if you want to join as a promoter. It is a multi-level marketing company. I'm not all in on the whole multi-level marketing thing, but that's just the way it's set up, and I use the products and I wanted to share and talk about the products. The other thing is some of their messaging is around weight loss and fat loss, so I need to be really clear and state that that is not my messaging. You all know I could give a shit about losing weight. I'm not into that fat phobic kind of messaging, but I really am into the convenience and the benefits of getting the body in a state of ketosis, which has myriad health benefits. If you're curious about it, look that up, Google that, ketosis. It's really useful for all kinds of disorders, diseases, and stuff like that. Obviously, if you have some serious medical things going on, you might want to check with a medical professional first. But so far, I'm really appreciating the company, the products. I'm getting some great results in my own experience. So just wanted to share that up with you all. And again, take it with a grain of salt. Try it out for yourself if you're interested. And if you're not, totally cool. So that's that. Again, it is elizabethdialto.experienceketo, which is KETO.com if you're interested. And back to the show. I love the word reclaim and reclamation. And for a while, one of my taglines was reclaiming and redefining womanhood for the 21st century. And I've been kind of noodling around with that over the last few months because I'm like, is this even a reclaiming? Or for some people, is it just a like claiming to even begin with, right? Because you can't reclaim something you had never claimed.
Oh, yeah. So my perspective is we're born perfect.
Mm-hmm.
There's, if I use kind of the bodywork example, a lot of my hands-on healing work is, or educating people about connecting into body is that the first thought we discard is that there's anything wrong at all. And then once we start from the thought and belief that our bodies are built to live in this world beautifully, we have a relationship with gravity, and our bodies are built to be balanced in that field of gravity. Therefore, everything that is pulling us out of balance is simply a layer that's been added through social conditioning, through accidents, through injuries, through thinking about ourselves in certain ways that causes us to contract or expand or twist, right? All of those are just extra layers that we don't need. Therefore, all we have to learn how to do, right? Again,
all we have to learn how to
do. But if we can hold on to the idea that who we are is just beautifully whole and perfect, the only work, and I use the word reclaiming because it's useful, but it's like we're just shedding layers. We're just shedding layers, and eventually we shed enough layers that we find the wholeness that's always been there, and can allow it to shine without needing all the protective pieces of armor in front of it, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate that because that's something we're going back and forth on it. And, ultimately it comes back to the thing that you were saying earlier, which is being wholehearted and whole and complete in yourself. So I'm excited that you are a body worker because this is something I have done a lot of trainings in energy work over the years. And I'm always so curious when I get body work done, I can always tell who are the people who are like energetically attuned and who are the people who are just like, they're going through the motions, doing what they're taught. And it's always amazing to me that anyone can work with their hands on people's bodies and not be energetically attuned. Does that make sense?
I know. Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're both because you strike me as like a very amazing person. And this is like, to me, this is a gift. Like the hands-on body workers who are also energetically attuned. I'm like, just when they're like, what do you need? What are we focusing on? I'm like, I trust you. Follow the map as it lays itself out for you. So what has that been like having your hands on, I don't know how, like you said, 12 years, hundreds, thousands of body, like shapes, sizes, abilities, probably ages, genders, all kinds of things. What is that like? It's a real general question. Do you need me to be more specific?
If you have a specific, sure. Otherwise, I'll just ramble.
Yeah, just ramble. I love it.
Okay. What is it like? So I'll start with a little bit of a funny story. I've wanted to be many things in my life, and one of them was a journalist. And when I wanted to do that, I was still so shy. I didn't pursue it because I couldn't understand how I could possibly ask personal questions of people with how horribly shy I was. and the humor is that I put my hands on people in their underwear.
It's the most personal thing there is.
And I ask questions. So, what is it like? It is marvelous and humbling, and our bodies have an intelligence that's separate than our thinking mind, and most of the troubles that we cause ourselves, I've noticed, comes from being in a culture that teaches us that thinking, intellectualizing, and rationalizing is the most important thing, and that our bodies are just vehicles to move our heads around on. And that way of believing our existence creates incredible tension and discomfort in people's bodies, to the point where, another belief that goes along with this floating head belief is that work must feel like effort. And therefore, a lot of people have desk jobs now, and yet they're so tight and tense, because even though they could be much more relaxed, the idea that working means effort translates to tension and contraction in the body. So working on people, half the time I feel heartbroken because none of us need to feel as uncomfortable as we do. And I'm using we because I cycle back in and out of knowing this and forgetting this too.
Same.
Yeah, it's just human, right? But working on people helps me remember more often, because in noticing a challenge for someone else, I often go, oh, am I doing that? So I feel simultaneously heartbroken that people are so uncomfortable in their bodies when they don't have to be, that they shrink and hide themselves often to feel safe, especially for women. Mm-hmm. I also feel humbled because there's this funny belief, especially about women. Men are a little less scathed by this, but that, women's beauty disappears and women's attractiveness disappears by, I don't know, when I was 18, I remember thinking once you're over 30, it's over. And now I'm 40, a week into 40, and working on, most of my clients are women. I've worked on women in their 70s with the most amazing, powerful bodies. And I've worked on people that are 20 that are lacking in vitality for various different reasons. There's no shame in it. But what has been such a blessing is to have that fable erased. It's not true. Beauty doesn't disappear. And the kinds of beauty, it's such a limited idea of youthful beauty, but it's more about whether that vital life force is present or not. And if and this is kind of more in the energy realm, but if that's present, it doesn't matter what your body looks like or you look like or how old you are, you're really attractive and vibrant and alive, and it glows through, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, working on people's bodies and helping people inhabit their bodies gives me and teaches me is hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I really appreciate about you. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, like that you will pause to think and like you'll give yourself some time. I noticed that during our interview, and even during this interview so far, a couple of times you've said, let me think for a moment. And then what comes out is like, that pause was so worth it. Helping people inhabit their bodies. And what I love and why I was so curious about that is, so I got out of a relationship right around the time that we're doing this interview. It's about 2 years. And one of the things, and I had been in relationships for almost a decade straight with just a couple months here and there where I wasn't, maybe 6 months at the most. And I knew I was going to choose to be single for a while. I started dating a little bit earlier this year, but I'm really taking my time because I'm just completely unwilling to like waste my time on shit that I know doesn't work for me. And most of what is available is stuff that doesn't work for me, right? Like I have no problem holding out for the good stuff. But one of the things that has been something to navigate is, I mean, we all need touch, right? And I'm especially like when you do that love languages thing, physical touch is always my number one. And it's like, how am I getting physical touch when I'm not in a relationship is not something I've ever really navigated. Because even before I was in like that kind of string of relationships for a decade, I was living on the East Coast with my closest friends and family. So at least you go home on the weekend, you get like, you can hug and snuggle your family, right? So this is really the first time where not only proximity wise am I more isolated from humans, I could be touching, but then I'm also not in a relationship. And I remember one friend suggesting like, well, body work, like go get a massage, go get a thing. And then it's one of the reasons why I actually have such reverence for the profession, because it literally is so healing on so many levels, right? To me personally, there's just like few things that get you in your body, and like my work is embodiment, that get you in your body the way being touched appropriately, lovingly, gently, in a healing way, or like any context where there's like safety and consent and permission. It's just like so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we need touch. It's like a vitamin.
It is a vitamin. It's a total vitamin. So I'm also curious, you also talk about all the different ways, your childhood experience, having a daughter, being a single mom, but also the environment you grew up in. You mentioned having parents who were like socially aware, and also, being in a dance troupe with a First Nations dance group. You've had some cool cultural experiences as well. And I'm curious how that has impacted you in relation to, I'm sure you see, especially through parents of other kids that your child hangs out with, your conditioning and your intentional socialization versus, having to combat some of the things in our collective culture that are quite ignorant or uninformed. I'll just put it that way.
Oh, that's a big one.
We'll probably spend the rest of our time on it.
I like talking about this. So with all that broadness, what specifically, can you narrow it down just a little for me?
Yeah. What I'm seeing is like your recipe, the ingredients that make you who you are. Mm-hmm. How do you find that uniquely positions you to do self-reclamation work with people?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what gives me the skills and positioning to do this work well with people and safely and in a contained way? Well, I studied anthropology for 4 years, which is all about culture, and I think that was a great foundation, because it starts the unraveling of, well, what soup did I grow up in? And let's just strip away these ideas that my culture is superior, which certainly as a white woman in Canada, whiteness is all about being on the top, right? And somehow superior, and it's outrageously false, but it's what we grow up with. And I say we because everyone grows up with that in a cultural milieu of a colonial country, whether or not they're white, right? That everyone soaks the ugliness up, and it impacts people differently depending where they are in position to that. I also was an exchange student in Japan in high school.
Cool.
Before the internet was really a thing, I wasn't able to escape by FaceTiming and Skyping and getting on the internet. I wasn't able to escape my loneliness, and I had barely any language. I was the only non-Japanese in my entire area. People were good at reading and writing English, but not so good at conversing. So I didn't have Japanese. Most people didn't have English, and I was really forced.
Oh no. Oh, we're back. We're back.
Oh, hang on. Are we good?
Yeah, I froze. You froze when you said I was really forced.
Yeah, I was forced to try to engage with people from a different culture because I needed friends. I was really lonely. And the other really crucial experience being an exchange student, especially before the internet, gave me was having the experience of being the only person that looked like me. It's really standing out, being stared at a lot, having all sorts of projections and assumptions put on me because I was, the idea was, oh, if you're from North America, you're a wild American, you're wild and crazy, and I'm not a wild and crazy American. I'm a pretty quiet, thoughtful Canadian who's very tall in Japan. So I just wasn't that cool. I really wasn't that cool. I wasn't meeting. So all that to say, I had the experience of living with 3 different host families, living in Japanese families, going to Japanese high school, being so out of place and very tangibly and physically having the experience. And I think it's a really important experience that even when people travel, you don't always get that if you're traveling it with your pals or you're being a tourist, right? And so it was lonely. It was good. It was lonely. It was many things, but I think it serves me well now, having had that experience of being a huge outsider, and like literally huge. People would also assume that I couldn't understand Japanese. So they'd talk about me in front of them. And I was young enough that I did understand. And one of the common things was like, oh, look at that huge foreigner. Wow.
Oh, man.
Anyways, and then I had a couple other exchange experiences in Russia with a really wonderful host family in Canada, but it's far away from where I'm from. And the parents of that family were from Jamaica. So I got to live with a Jamaican Canadian family. And then other experiences that have broadened an ability to guide people through this kind of reclamation. I'm raising a mixed race daughter. Mm-hmm. She's half Black. Her father's from Barbados. I have a lot of my extended family is visibly mixed race. And so I'm trying to find the right words because I'm a white woman, and I every day get to be witness to all sorts of microaggressions and outrageous assumptions that highlight how devastating whiteness is. A lot of them are simply like, where are you from? Because the assumption is that if you're not white, you don't belong.
So,
right?
It was sometime in 2016 because I was still living in my Carlsbad place. I interviewed a guy named Elliot Hulse, and he brought that up, that question, that what are you question.
That too, yeah.
Which is similar to like, where are you from? It's like the things people will say when they're trying to identify you. And that's the number, I'm very ethnically ambiguous. And so that's the number one question I get in my life. And up until Elliot brought it up in that podcast interview, I had never even considered the impact of constantly being questioned what I was and where I was from has had on me. And I've literally been just like unpacking it ever since with like no definitive, I mean, I couldn't even tell you. And what's cool, I was scrolling around on all your stuff this morning and I noticed you had shared a post that my dear friend Nisha had written on Facebook about raising mixed race children. And I am a mixed race child, Italian and Puerto Rican, a little bit German and Irish, but there was a lot of erasure of the Hispanic culture in language and in other things. Some of it was intentional, some of it was unintentional. It's such an interesting thing. But I was really appreciating that post that Nisha had written when I saw it and your perspective after sharing it, because I never thought of it from the perspective of my mom, who is the white one. And what was about that post, we'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes for people listening. If this thread of conversation is interesting to you, is the responsibility of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge responsibility, and I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm meeting the challenge, because often I'm learning, things come up and then I stumble.
Yeah.
Usually. It's I have to restrain myself from yelling at people a lot, honestly. It's just like,
Sure.
you think it's an innocent question, but because my daughter has fielded this question, and maybe you can relate, she's fielded this question almost every day for her whole life. And I've been witness to people asking her or asking me, another assumption being, and not that this isn't to suggest that adopting is less than, but in my case, I gave birth to my daughter, and often people look at her skin color, and even though our faces are almost identical, they look at her skin color and assume that I didn't give birth to her. Where did you get her? Was the question when she was really little. It's like, well, I got her from my womb.
My vagina. She came straight out of my own vagina.
Yeah. But
I know
again,
that's not anatomically correct. It just sounds funnier.
Yeah. And then there's the whole other thing of, whose business is it anyways?
Right.
Why do you feel it's okay to ask me that question just because her skin is a different color than mine, which is very normal, even in quote unquote white families, to have different shades of whiteness,
different shades of beige. So I started doing stand-up comedy a couple months ago. And one of the very first things that I wanted to joke about was being ethnically ambiguous. Specifically for me, that people often, because my hair is so curly, think I'm Jewish. And so like this whole thing about being like Italian and Puerto Rican or Jewish and how I used to respond to it and blah, 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 that made it into the bit. But as I was really working out that piece of material, I was like, there's 3 kinds of people that ask you that what are you question. There are like really like kind-hearted, curious, enthusiastic people who are just like, what are you? And while it's like the intention is lovely, they like want to get to know you, it also like you feel like a zoo animal. It's like, you're so exotic. And I'm like, that exotic word, I'm sure your daughter gets that sometimes. It's like, again, like I'm not the snow leopard at the Central Park Zoo. I am also a person, right? And then there's like the people who are asking because they think you are what they are. And there's almost like your own responsibility not to be a dick, because then it like is offensive to them, even though, it's so, there's a lot of nuance and complexity to it.
Yeah. I didn't even think of the other part of it, of people assuming that you're the same as them.
Well, I realized this because people who would ask me if I was Jewish usually are Jewish.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, we've gone on some tangents, but I want to come back to what I love about, and again, when I was reading on your website is, you're a person with so many different life experiences, but then it all comes back to like that individuality, that self-reclamation, and even that in and of itself is a huge responsibility, even though we're all part of a collective anyway.
Yeah. And I think something I wanted to touch on in terms of reclaiming self and also deepening into lineage, ancestry, and roots is the incredible importance of feeling grief and feeling rage and working through that, because I'm kind of saying the collective we, but what I mean is sort of North American culture is very invested in avoiding those 2 emotional experiences. And healing really requires feeling both of them.
Yeah. And, do you know who Stacey Jordan Shelton is?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I don't know her well, but I really like her work.
I've been courting her to come on the podcast. She's been very busy. We'll get her on eventually. But she wrote a bunch of posts the other day on Facebook about rage. Oh, no, we froze again. Oh, we're back.
Oh, you froze when you said she wrote a bunch of posts on Facebook.
Cool. She wrote a bunch of posts on Facebook the other day about rage. And what I appreciated was her nuance in rage of saying, we have to feel our rage, but what are we doing with it? Right? Because it's there's like that phase, like, you need to feel it. But then a lot of people are being so irresponsible with the emotion, just like blasting it out on social media, just like spraying it all over the internet. But it's like, what are you doing with it? how are you cultivating it? What kind of like healthy action can you take with it? Because it's very potent, that energy.
Yeah. So I think, you make a good point. Spraying anger everywhere is not healthy.
Yeah.
But so this is from my perspective of being a woman, socialized to be like, anger's not good. Feeling anger is not okay. And I think most women are born angry. I read a beautiful Jungian quote that said, women are born angry because they're considered less than from the moment they're born. And this is okay. You should feel angry. So I feel like, yes, when I tapped into my anger, it was overwhelming. And I'm sure there were like, the anger fizzing out. But the biggest lesson of anger for me was, oh, I'm angry because there's a part of me that's worthy that's been told it's not worthy. And I'm allowed to feel that. And then my responsibility with having anger is to cultivate clean boundaries and stand by them. Right?
Yeah. We have a lot of conversations on the show about boundaries. It's a good topic here. So as we begin to wrap up, is there anything I didn't ask you that you were hoping we would get to, that we didn't touch on? I know in these conversations, because of the way my brain works, they often take a lot of twists and turns, but I do always like to let the guests say, yeah, there was this one thing I really wanted to make sure we covered.
I think the thing I want to share is that for me, what's so important about reclaiming myself, about guiding people through a reclamation process is that when I know myself more fully and I tap into my own lineage, my own ancestry, my own values, I honor everyone else better. I assume less, I connect more, and I shed more of the ugliness of thinking that my way might be better than another's, and I instead get more curious about their heritage and their process and how beautiful that can be as well. How we can kind of support each other to glow rather than pushing in some way.
I appreciate this because one of the books that I love the term radicalized. I didn't start using it until Desiree Adaway said it on the podcast, but one of the books that radicalized me was reading Lovey Ajayi's book, I'm Not Judging You. Do you know Lovey or her stuff?
Vaguely.
She's hilarious. So I like her because she's funny, but she's also Nigerian. And for me, learning about the real distinct difference in experience that someone has when they are African American, like came to America from Africa, or if they were generations down born here, that gave me such a better understanding. Like, obviously I can't understand that I can't put myself in someone's shoes, but just like, wow, what different experiences. And from that got me curious. What other experiences are so different, like that I just couldn't have fathomed, just like all of the nuance and the different layers. So I love that you really weave in this lineage, ancestry, heritage into what you do. I also appreciated when Janelle had me on her show, the first question she asked was about whose land do you live on? And that was also a couple years ago, not something I ever would have thought about. When I moved to Malibu, I remember looking it up because I wanted to like go out in nature and be like, hey, thanks for having me. Because, we're all kind of living on, I won't say we all, like you said, in colonial countries. We're living on land that is air quote ours now, but really isn't or wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in most of the cases is still stolen.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So thank you so much. This was so enjoyable. Just tell people, where do you prefer? Do you do social media?
Oh, I like Instagram.
Great.
I am on Facebook, but mostly Instagram.
Cool. So that's your preference. And it's Janelle Hardy. It's just your name, right?
Janelle Hardy Art, because there's another Janelle Hardy out there.
Oh. So Janelle Hardy Art. And then website is?
JanelleHardy.com. And Janelle is spelled like Janelle Monáe.
Who I love. This is so great. I really do. I love people whose personalities are just so much gentler than mine. It just feels so calming. Like even just talking to you feels like a warm hug. So thank you so much. Everyone will be able to find you on your website, on Instagram. We'll put links to anything we mentioned in the show notes. Was there anywhere else that you wanted to send people?
Oh, just on my website, I do a free outline your memoir workshop.
Oh.
Yeah. So 2 hours and you're ready to go. Yeah.
Wow. And how many people do that who have no intention of even writing a memoir?
Actually, I think almost everyone I've ever met has a secret wish to write a memoir.
I think you're probably right. I'd love.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite memoir?
Dani Shapiro's Devotion.
I read that last year. That's so random.
Actually, I have so many favorites, but that one popped to my head.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it was my favorite, but the one that moved me the most, like I remember sobbing by like the fourth page, was The Glass Castle.
Yes.
Jeanette Walls.
Yeah.
Kind of perfect way to wrap up this conversation because that was something that gave me a lens into poverty that I had never had. That was just like gut-wrenching. So, this is one of those times where I'm like, let me just keep stalling so I don't have to press stop because I enjoy talking to this person so much, but I will let you go get on with your day. Thank you again, Janelle. Really enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
Bye. You were saying something about that tall poppy syndrome. What is that if anyone listening doesn't know?
So it's really, it's part of the vernacular in Australian society, and I think the United Kingdom, it's really that experience of being too tall, too much, too beautiful, too brilliant, too. And you need to get cut down to size, sugar. You need to get cut down to size. And it's very visceral, and it's, and I have days of things that I want to say about that because it is so extremely painful to experience it. And I think even more painful is that unconsciously we've contributed to it. So I think about this in the context of, I talk about we canonize people and then we dehumanize people, right? Ooh. So we do this like kind of like bell curve of, putting people up on a pedestal. And then when they start to zig when we want them to zag, we cut them down, we demonize them. And again, it's pretty unconscious. And I think it's like I can feel it in my chest as I say, I think this is one of the biggest reasons people are afraid of success because they have, ancient recollections of having this happen to them, and they've seen where they've participated in it too.